Simon, come with me. We have found the Messiah. My brother Andrew, he was such a dreamer. But I went with him that day. I just needed a break from mending my nets. But when I met Jesus, he said to me, one day your name will be called Peter. Peter, that means a rock. What was he saying? That I wasn't a rock now? I was a bit insulted. After all, it was my father Jonah who had given me that name, Simon. And Simon, it would remain. You see, I was a fisherman. I was a great fisherman. I grew up along the banks of the sea. One night, after I had fished all night and caught nothing, I came back to the shore, and there was Jesus. I found him there surrounded by a crowd of people he'd been teaching. I was so tired, all I wanted to do was wash my nets and go home and rest. But Jesus said to me, Peter, push your boat out of the water so I might have a platform to teach the people. And so I did as the Lord asked. And after he finished teaching, I must admit that I was anxious to go home. But as I turned to leave, Jesus said to me, Peter, take your nets, go out into the deep and cast them down for a great catch. Imagine that, a carpenter telling me how to fish. I did protest slightly. I said, Master, but we have fished all night and we have caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I will do as you say. And I did. And I have never seen so great a catch in all of my life. In all of my years of a fisherman, I never saw so many fish. As I was pulling in the nets, they started to break. I had to cry out for help. And James and John were nearby in a boat, and they came to my rescue. And there were 2 boats loaded down with fish. They nearly sank. We almost didn't make it to shore. And when we got to shore, Jesus was laughing at us. He was laughing and smiling. I looked at him, and somehow in my embarrassment and wonder, I too believed. Perhaps I also was a dreamer. And there I knelt at his feet. I fell at his feet, and I worshipped him. He invited Andrew and James and John and I to be his disciples. He said that he would make us fishers of men. From that day forward, we would follow him, and my life would be changed. I followed him. I heard words that thrilled and challenged my heart. I saw him perform miracles, but the greatest thing that I saw from him was his compassion, and his courage, and his wisdom. I was so proud that he had chosen me to be one of his disciples, to learn of him, and I still had so much to learn. He still called me Simon. Strange how now I wanted him to call me Peter. And I would prove to him that I was that rock. And that I could become courageous, strong, and faithful. I remember my first failure. During a trip across the Sea of Galilee, Jesus fell asleep. He had taught all day to a great throng of people, and he was exhausted, and he fell asleep in the boat. And while he was sleeping, the wind started to rise, and I had witnessed many a storm kick up very quickly on this sea. And as he slept, the waves, they sloshed over the side of the boat until it seemed that we would be swamped. And in our panic, we cried out, Master! Don't you care? We are perishing. And Jesus awoke. Still a little sleepy, he stood and he stretched forth his hand. And he said to the wind, Peace, be still. And the wind stopped. And the waves became still. Even the winds and the waves obeyed his voice. I stood there trembling as I looked at him. And I'll never forget those words that he said to me. He said, Why were you so afraid? Why did you have no faith? But I did have faith. My fear overwhelmed my faith in that moment. But I promised it would never happen again. I would have a second chance to prove myself to him. Once again, we were traveling on a boat. But this time Jesus did not go with us. Instead, he went up into the mountains to pray, and we expected that he would join us on the other side. That's what we thought. And as we made our way, once again a storm arose. Late, very late at night, almost the fourth watch of the night, we saw something coming toward us on the water, but we could not tell what it was. We all became frightened, and someone cried out in fear, It is a ghost! It is a ghost! And I must admit that I was a little dismayed and nervous myself. But then I heard a familiar voice. The voice said, Be of good cheer! It is I! Do not be afraid! And I answered, Lord, if that's you, call me to come out to you on the waves. When would I learn to keep my mouth closed? But he said, Come! And now I must go, for every eye was upon me. And so I stepped out of the boat. And when I did, the waves, they chilled my feet. The spray came and washed over my beard and stung my eyes. But there I was, standing on the waves. This could not be. I looked down into the swirling waters, and it seemed to mock me. It promised to swallow me up. And for a moment I became frightened, and I did begin to sink. And I cried out, Master, save me! And as I did, I felt his arm grab mine, and he helped me back into the boat. As I sat there, dripping wet and silent, the shame I felt was unbearable. The silent laughter from the other apostles, it overwhelmed me. But then I heard his words once more. How little is your faith? Why did you doubt? I remember that last night. We just finished our supper. And Jesus stood. He wrapped a towel around his waist. He was about to wash our feet. You see, all of us were too proud, and no one was willing to assume the task of the servant. But Jesus was about to do this. This could not happen, and so I spoke to him, and I said, Lord, you will not wash my feet. And he said to me, if I don't wash your feet, then you have no part of me. And so I said, Lord, then also my hands and my head. He was trying to teach us humility. I should have learned that lesson long before. I was troubled by this experience, not so much as what came next. He said, one of you shall betray me. A traitor? Betrayed? One of us a traitor? Which one? I would deal with that treason. Who could it be? Matthew. After all, wasn't he already a traitor by serving Rome as a tax collector to the nation of Israel? Betrayal was in his blood. Thomas was of small faith. He was always asking strange questions. Maybe it was Thomas. I didn't know. And so I asked John to question our Lord concerning these things. I would find this scoundrel, and I would make him regret his deception and his treachery. But as these thoughts of vengeance filled my heart, Jesus continued his troubling words. He said, I must go away. And where I go, you cannot follow. Lord, why can't I follow you? I would give my life for you. I would die for you. Then he turned to me and said, Peter, before the cock crows, you will deny me thrice. No, Lord. No, Lord. Not me. All others might deny you, Lord, but I will never deny you. Never. Shaken beyond measure, we left for the garden, Gethsemane. We often went there to pray when we were in Jerusalem. Deny him. Those words pierced my heart. How could he think that I would deny him? What had I ever done that would cause him to think that I would not be loyal to him. Perhaps he was speaking in some strange parable. He often did this, you know. And I could not understand. But then he called for John and James and I to pray with him in the garden. And I felt reassured. He still believed in me after all. No doubt I had misunderstood him. Or perhaps my strong protest and my declaration of devotion had convinced him that I could be trusted. And so, as I knelt to pray, my thoughts were filled with the times that he had chosen the three of us for a special blessing. At the house of Jairus, we were the only three that saw the young girl raised from the dead. And then on the mount, when he was glorified in the presence of Moses and Elijah, only we were there, and now the three of us in the garden. Yes, he still believed in me. As I dozed off to sleep, there was a noise. Was I dreaming? Startled, I arose, and still sleepy, I looked into the distance, and I saw a band of soldiers coming closer. Puzzled and still half asleep, I began to realize their mission. They were coming to arrest Jesus. I grabbed my sword, and I remember thinking I would come to his defense. Deny him? Never. I raced out, and I drew my sword in a wide arc through the air, and I came down on the servant of the high priest's ear, slicing it off. I was about to draw another blow when Jesus stopped me and said, "Put away your sword. I must drink the cup that the Father has prepared for me." One against so many. He probably saved my life that day. But I remember feeling confused. What would I do? Where would I go? And so I ran. We all ran. I was confused. And as I fled, I remembered the words running through my mind, "I will never deny you." And so I stopped, and I turned, and I followed him, but afar off. I arrived at the judgment hall, and I was warming myself by the fire. It was cold and damp, and then someone said, You were with Jesus of Galilee." Ignoring my protest, she continued, "You were there with Jesus." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. And then another voice of a stranger came. Yes, you were with Jesus." "No," I said, "I was not with him." And then another voice came. It said, "You were with him in the garden." "I don't know him," I said. And then they brought him forth. "Oh, my Lord. Oh, my Lord. I will never deny you." Those words stuck in my throat. My eyes met his eyes, and I had to turn away. I could not bear to watch him die. How could he die? This could not be. Later, John came. John was the only one that had gone to the cross with him. Not I. Only John. And it was true. Jesus was dead. And I had denied him. Just as he said I would. Things would never be the same. Except for God. Except for God. About 3 days would pass. But oh, what our God can do in 3 days. Oh, what our God can do in 3 hours. Oh, what our God can do in 3 minutes or 3 seconds or no time at all except for God. Remember that night? Like it was yesterday. I spent the night in sleeplessness, rose at every sound, half in hopeless sorrow, half in fear the day would find the soldiers breaking through to carry us away. Then just before the sunrise, I heard someone at the wall. The gate began to rattle and a voice began to call. I hurried to the window and looked down into the street, expecting swords and torches and the sound of soldiers' feet. Well, there was no one there but Mary, and so I went down to let her in. John stood there beside us as she told us where she'd been. She said they moved him in the night and none of us knows where. The stone's been rolled away now, his body isn't there. We both ran toward the garden and then John ran on ahead. We found the stone and the empty tomb just the way that Mary said. But the winding sheet they'd wrapped him in was just an empty shell. How and where they'd taken him was more than I could tell. Well, something strange had happened there, but just what, I didn't know. John believed a miracle, but I just turned to go. Circumstance and speculation couldn't lift me very high, for I'd seen them crucify him, and then I saw him die. Back inside the house again, the guilt and anguish came. Everything I promised him just added to my shame. When at last it came to choices, I denied I knew his name. Even if he was alive, it wouldn't be the same. Then suddenly the air was filled with a strange and sweet perfume, and light that came from everywhere drove shadows from the room. Jesus stood before me with his arms held open wide. I just fell down on my knees, clung to him and cried. He raised me to my feet, and as I looked into his eyes, love was shining out from them like sunlight from the skies. Guilt in my confusion disappeared in sweet release, and every fear I ever had just melted into peace. He's alive! He's alive! He's alive!